forests here in British Columbia. I'm honored to be here today on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'm joined today by Bowinn Ma, who's the Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. Today, we are providing an update on the wildfire situation across our province. The wildfire season is well underway here in British Columbia. There are currently 86 fires burning across British Columbia, 13 of which have been detected in just the last 24 hours. Since April 1st, 2023, 433 wildfires have burned a total of 762,000 hectares. The 20-year average for this time of year is 306 wildfires and 18,000 hectares. So the 20-year average is down here, and this season is way up there. The vast majority of these hectares have burned within the northeast region of the province, where we continue to respond to our largest incidents. As we see more climate events and forest fires, I want to start by acknowledging all the people who are being impacted. It's extremely difficult living day to day with smoke or near a fire or being on an evacuation alert or order. On behalf of all British Columbians, let me say thank you to the firefighters, first responders, emergency management teams, highway crews, and communities who are working to keep people safe. The BC Wildfire Service is working around the clock to suppress fires, reduce impacts on communities, and share up-to-date information with you, the public. As we look forward at the days ahead, parts of British Columbia will experience rain and cooler temperatures. While this incoming weather will help short-term firefighting efforts in some areas, people need to continue to take precautions and be prepared. Given the longer-term impacts of drought in British Columbia, it will not take long for any of these forests that receive rain to dry out once again. Though this incoming weather is a welcome reprieve, some regions will not receive any rain, including the northeast corner of the province. There are more than 1,300 personnel directly engaged in wildfire response efforts across the province today. Let me express my appreciation to the BC Wildfire Service and other personnel dedicated to responding to the threats posed by wildfires. Ahead of this year, we made critical investments, the largest in the history of our province, to strengthen wildfire preparedness and response. Most importantly, we moved the BC Wildfire Service to year-round operations to boost fire preparedness and planning. This year, BC Wildfire Service hired over 100 new permanent staff and brought on 330 new recruits for fighting fires. We've invested in new structure protection units, drones, camp infrastructure, and mass water delivery systems to help to assist with putting out fires. And we doubled the annual funding for wildfire prevention programs. Even with scaled up investments and programs, we have had a difficult fire season to date, and we may well have a difficult summer. In British Columbia, wildfire and emergency spending is statutory. That means we can spend what we need to spend to fight fires and keep people safe. Given recent history and knowing that climate change will result in more impactful fires, we will also keep working to increase prevention and preparedness efforts here in British Columbia. We can all do our part to help firefighting efforts. I encourage everyone to fire smart their home and property. This can be as simple as cleaning your gutter, mowing your lawn, or making sure anything combustible is stored at least 10 meters away from your house. There are many great tips in the Fire Smart Homeowner's Guide available through the Fire Smart BC website. Please continue to monitor government directives, prohibitions in your region. British Columbia is big, vast, and ecologically very diverse. Decisions regarding prohibitions will be made based on current and anticipated conditions in your region. Currently, open burning, including campfires, is prohibited across much of the province. You can find more information about prohibitions on the BC Wildfire website or mobile app. The website and the mobile app are also excellent sources for up-to-date information on the locations and details of all active wildfires in British Columbia. You can also report a wildfire by using the app or by calling 555, that's 4 times in a row, from a cell phone. Let me now pass it over to Minister Ma. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Ralston, and good afternoon, everyone. I too am honored to be here on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. As you've heard, we have seen an early start to the wildfire season, and it is already impacting communities right across the province. Over 2,750 people are under an evacuation order in the Peace River Regional District, the District of Tumbler Ridge, and the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality. I know that this is an incredibly challenging time. I want to assure you that Wildfire Service and emergency management personnel are working hard to keep you and your community safe. Emergency support services are available to those who have been evacuated and require assistance, including accommodation, food, transportation, and incidentals. I want to thank all of the volunteers on the ground who are administering these emergency support services. Please know you must be registered with the Emergency Support Services program to receive emergency support services. I also want to remind everyone across the province that it is now possible for you to pre-register with emergency support services online using the evacuee registration and assistance tool. This can be found at ess.gov.bc.ca. You do not have to be at risk of an imminent evacuation in order to pre-register. Any British Columbian can pre-register for emergency support services now. Pre-registration means that if you are evacuated from your home, you will be processed at a reception center more quickly and able to access emergency support services right away. Again, individuals and families can now pre-register at ess.gov.bc.ca. I recognize this is also a difficult time for people and businesses impacted by Highway 4, the Highway 4 closure due to the Cameron Lake Bluffs wildfire. The daily scheduled convoys carrying essential goods continues. Trucks are getting through, and we're focused on reopening the highway as soon as it is safe to do so. We are continuing to work closely with impacted local communities, the tourism industry, and other industries. The challenges we are facing here in BC due to wildfires are sadly not unique to our province, and we continue to coordinate with the federal government as well. As we move further into the wildfire season, I urge people to stay informed and be prepared. While our government is making sure that supports and resources are in place for the upcoming wildfire season, it is equally important that people start putting together a plan. Like I said last week, now is the time to prepare yourselves, your family, your home, and your community for any potential fires. Follow all fire bans and avoid activity that may result in a wildfire. Whether you live near an active wildfire or not, I encourage every British Columbian to take 20 minutes out of their day to put together an emergency plan, including packing a grab-and-go kit so that you are prepared to leave immediately if you are required to evacuate. The province, First Nations, and local authorities will continue to be there to assist families and individuals who need accommodation and assistance. If you are evacuated and find it more suitable to stay with family and friends, you are still eligible to receive emergency support services if you require assistance to help with costs relating to billeting, food, and incidentals. Make sure that you register with emergency support services to receive these supports. My ministry continues to work closely with First Nations, local authorities, and other partners to identify communities and venues that can support evacuees in the event of a large-scale evacuation. During emergencies, the province amplifies all evacuation alerts and orders issued by communities on emergencyinfobc.ca and on the Emergency Info BC Twitter account. The province may also issue broadcast intrusive alerts for evacuations on behalf of communities. It is incredibly important that British Columbians are aware of these sources of information before an emergency takes place. Lastly, as a reminder, if you are placed under an evacuation order, you must evacuate immediately. Your local authority or First Nation will provide information on evacuation routes and reception centers for you to go to. I know that leaving the place that you love and call home during an emergency is difficult, but by staying behind, you are putting yourselves and others in danger. I want to reiterate the importance of being prepared by taking steps to be prepared and knowing where to find emergency information. By doing so, we can all gain a sense of control, sense of safety, and peace of mind. Preparedbc.ca has excellent resources available in multiple languages to get you started. So let's continue to look forward to all of the joy that summer brings while recognizing the potentially challenging situations ahead. Stay calm, be alert, and be prepared. And with that, I'll pass the microphone back to Minister Ralston.
Great, thanks very much. We're now going to call upon the three experts from the various ministries. I think Chris was first.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. If media have questions, please press *1 to enter. Minister, we do also have questions. Our first question for today will go to Richard Zussman, Global News. Okay. We're going to move on to Wolf Deppner, Black Press.
Is that Morse code or?
Hello?
Hi, is that Wolf?
Yes, it is.
Wolf, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking my question. To the issue of resources, with the federal government about resources here, the federal government has talked to other jurisdictions around the world to get more firefighters to come to Canada. Can you update the public on where those efforts stand? I know the European Union is sending over firefighters to Quebec. What, if any, additional resources can BC expect to receive in the coming days and weeks?
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question, and we will not run out of personnel. There are a number of arrangements, both at the national level, as you mentioned, and internationally to provide mutual assistance. So when British Columbia needs support, we know we can count on it. I'll turn that over to, I think it's Ian who can give further detail on that. And if not, it's Chris.
We're going to actually, I see Ian is spotlit there. Can we please actually begin with Cliff Chapman of the BC Wildfire Service?
Thank you very much for your question. This is something that we manage as fire agencies across Canada, and we're all part of the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire community, and we use that agency called CIFSI to put in requests for resource support from other jurisdictions in Canada. Obviously, this year and this spring has been unique in that there aren't very many resources available in Canada, as the hazard and the fire season has started early, as we are all well aware with what's going on and has gone on in Alberta. And obviously Quebec and Ontario have started to see fires, as well as Saskatchewan and the territories. So the request through CIFSI has now gone international. We have had supports come into Canada from Australia, from Mexico, the European Union, as you referenced, and we have put holds in with CIFSI that we will be looking for, or potentially looking for, support over the course of the next 3 weeks. At this time in BC, we have enough resource capacity to manage the fires that are on the landscape, as well as be prepared for potential new ignitions from lightning-caused fires. But we have put in requests to support our agency and support this province really for the next 3-4 weeks, so that we have the ability to rest our own staff who have been going since the middle of April. And we are going to see some of that start to come into BC as early as this weekend. We may see some staff come in from the United States. which will be great to be able to give some of our staff some rest and recovery and have them available for July. We've also been in conversations about potentially looking at firefighting resources from other agencies, including agencies. It's really almost call it an international partnership where we are really trying to work collectively across the globe to support and surge to agencies that need it. At this time, BC is not at the forefront of one of those agencies, but we are putting in requests in advance of when we believe we will need the resources so that we can effectively plan for the summer ahead.
Wolf.
At this stage, how much additional money does the province sort of estimate will be needed to help deal with this fire situation? Obviously, the situation is evolving. No one has a crystal ball looking into what the situation is going to be in July and August. But what sort of ballpark figure are we talking about here in terms of additional resources needed to potentially respond to, as the minister said, a very challenging fire season?
Before I turn it over to Cliff, let me just say that as I said in my comments, spending on wildfires is statutory. There's no need to go back to any of the Treasury Board processes. The money is available when it's needed, and so that is not a concern. In terms of a specific estimate of how much we're likely to spend this season, I think that would be hard to estimate, but I'll let Cliff make any additional comments that he might want to.
Thank you, Minister Ralston, and I agree with exactly what you said. It's very difficult to forecast what the fire season will look like in July and August. Obviously, when we did our briefing last week, we talked about the potential of a very challenging fire season. I'd say the one thing we could do is look in the past at 2017, 2018, 2021, and look at the numbers that came out of years like that. And I don't have them in front of me, but as a ballpark estimate, it was roughly $500 million in direct response recovery costs associated with those fire seasons, and slightly up from there, depending on which of those 3 years. So certainly we can get those numbers to the media after this call. But that's I guess a reference point. But again, until we know the conditions of July, August, September, how long our fire season will go, it's very difficult to forecast those numbers. We do make efforts to do so. But it is an inherently, it's very inherently quite expensive when we start to bring in resources from other agencies, when we have as much rotary wing aircraft and air tanker aircraft that we already have in this province. I believe we're up to just under 80 helicopters that are on contract for BC Wildfire Service right now. We have a fleet of just under 30 fixed wing air tanker aircraft and bird dog aircraft. So, we have a lot of capacity on the ground right now and in the air right now. And so looking back at 2021, 17, and 18 would give us a good starting point about the potential costs of a season if it continues on the trajectory that we've been on so far this spring.
Our next question comes from Richard Zussman, Global News. Richard, please go ahead.
To the ministers, I know we keep hearing reference to 17, 18, and 21, the years the province declared state of emergencies. Is the preparation here that BC is preparing itself to call a state of emergency? And at what point does that get determined, considering that we, can't predict what's going to unfold over the next few weeks and months?
Turn that question over to my colleague, Minister Ma.
Thank you very much for that question. So to be clear, the Wildfire Act includes quite substantial tools to enable province to respond to wildfire situations, including the deployment of resources, the spending of money, and so forth. However, we are constantly evaluating the situation and trying to project the trends that we're seeing on the ground. If there are circumstances where we may need to access emergency provisions of the Emergency Program Act, then a provincial state of emergency could be called. Some of those emergency provisions might include orders to restrict movement in certain areas of the province. It could involve the the establishment or the commandeering of supply chains. It could also include price fixing of commodities. These are extraordinary powers that we don't throw around lightly. The decision to declare a provincial state of emergency is a very serious one. It is something that we are constantly monitoring and taking a look at as things roll out throughout the season.
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
When we last got one of these briefings, we looked at 3 scenarios, and one of them was predicated on how things would unfold over what is now the last few weeks. Did we get enough rain in this province to be helpful over the last week or 2? Are we still significantly worried? Like, what was what unfolded over the last week or 2 that helped dictate or potentially predict what we're going to see over the next few weeks and months?
We were very grateful for the rain that we saw over the last several days, but from what I understand, it was not enough to alleviate our concerns. I mean, perhaps I'll pass it on to Cliff Chapman of the BC Wildfire Service to elaborate further.
Thank you, Minister Ma, and thank you for the question. So yes, we have rain that has fallen, in particular in the southern half of the province, including southern Vancouver Island and the South Coast, which has been really welcome for our organization and I think the province at large. The challenge, as you'll recall on the briefing we did last week, is that we need sustained rainfall really through the month of June and ideally as we start to trend into July and August as well. We have not seen sustained rainfall in this province since we went snow-free and we stopped seeing snow. We've seen dribs and drabs, and we certainly have seen some localized downpours, but with the conditions, with the overwinter drought, coming out of the winter with drought, breaking temperature records in late April, early May, doing it again in June, the fire numbers we're in a tricky spot, and I guess to be really I guess not too technical, is we need sustained rainfall over the course of a period of a week, 7 to 10 days, and that's just not in the forecast. Right now, we're going to see rain continue. We're going to see a little bit more rain today. Unfortunately, rain is also coming with thunderstorms, and at this time, with the smoke that's kind of blown into the south over the last 24 hours and will continue to kind of sit over us for the next couple of days, it's very challenging to detect fires when you have smoke and cloud cover in the interior and up the spine of the province. So we have seen enough to give us, I would say, a good opportunity to apply suppression tactics on our fires that are south of Fort St. John, to continue to mobilize, to put guards around those fires and use the tools and the technologies that we use to suppress fires. So from that standpoint, rain is always going to be welcome. From a long-term hazard standpoint, we are still in conditions where it's not going to take very much warming to turn us back into being very prone to ignition and very prone to fire spread. So I guess to put it really in summary, we have 4 to 7 days here, I think, where we're going to see a mix of sun and clouds. We're going to see the potential of rainfall each day, but it's going to be scattered, and it's not going to be that heavy downpour of 100 mils that we sometimes see on the coast. We'll be fortunate to see 10 to 20 mils in any given weather station over the course of the next 10 days. Ideally, we'll see more, but that's what we're forecasting, is roughly 5 to 15, 10 to 20 mils, somewhere in that spectrum, and that will help. But it won't be enough to knock down the hazard as we enter into July and August, which typically set up as our warmer, drier, hotter months, where we see ridges of high pressure sit over the province for sometimes weeks at a time. And that's really what we're paying attention to now as we forward plan. When is that next ridge going to come in? When is it going to stand up and start to see our temperatures get back into the 30s, low 30s, mid 30s, and being able to assess what the fire hazard is after that?
Our next question comes from Jane Skripnik, Globe and Mail. Jane, please go ahead.
Hey, thank you. I'm wondering about the situation in Port Alberni and the number of natural disasters we've seen in recent years that have impacted access to communities like Port Alberni, communities that are more remote. Is the province giving any serious thought to bettering emergency transportation routes in and out of communities in more remote areas?
So first off, I do want to thank the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure and the team over at Port Alberni for how quickly they worked together to establish the detour route that they did. When the highway was shut down, they put in place a detour route through using Forest Service roads extremely quickly. And the convoy system that they have put in place is allowing trucks carrying critical supplies and fuel in and into and out of communities as required. In the days ahead, the Ministry of Transportation will be looking to open Highway 4 using a single lane alternating traffic system. I'll later pass it on to Janelle Staite to speak to that further. But I'll also say that we've been working very closely with Port Alberni on other transportation routes as well, including options to barge fuel in, for instance. When we work with communities that are potentially stranded or cut off from other areas as a result of a natural disaster, as a result of a wildfire, we work very, very closely with them to establish alternate supply chains, and we use every option available to us. It could involve establishing detour routes using Forest Service roads, as we involve using waterways and airways as well. We leave no stone unturned. In a more proactive sense, there is funding available through the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, administered through UBCM, provided by the province. There's funding to allow communities to actually do some of that proactive evacuation route planning and that proactive route planning that might be needed during an emergency. And with that, I'll pass it on to Janelle for any further updates she may have on Highway 4.
Thank you, Minister. So as the Minister said, we are working closely with BC Wildfire Services on reestablishing the connection directly along Highway 4. In the interim, our detour route is working very effectively. In fact, this morning we saw a convoy of 8 fuel trucks go through between Lake Cowichan and Port Alberni, so demonstrating the effectiveness of our piloted convoys and the effectiveness of the alternate route. As a province, we continue to invest in Highway 4 to ensure that it remains safe and reliable, and that will continue outside of this event just to ensure that that linkage is in place. Right now, we do have vehicles on the ground from our maintenance contractor. We've given the okay from BC Wildfire Services to start some cleanup work below the fire slope, which is setting us on the trajectory to be able to reopen the Highway 4 to single lane alternating traffic by next weekend.
Do you have a follow-up, Jane?
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned that we're expecting some help to arrive from the States as soon as this weekend. How many firefighters can we expect to be arriving?
Thanks. I'll just turn that more technical question over to Cliff Chapman.
Thank you. So for this weekend, what we've requested is an incident management team to support us from the United States. And incident management teams are highly trained, highly certified personnel with usually years of experience to come in and take command of a large scale fire that is challenging, our efforts and our resourcing. And so this incident management team will come. We will put them onto one of our priority fires, and it will give us the ability to rest one of our own incident management teams. We have 6 of them in BC. And so this is an opportunity for us to rest one of our incident management teams, which again, our incident management teams are all going on their second or third tour of duty already this year, which is abnormal relative to many years in the past 20 years, where generally we may not start to see our incident management teams deploy until July and August. So we're bringing the American team up. There'll be roughly 20 of them that come up. This is not ground firefighters. This is actually an incident command team to come and take over an incident. So that's what's coming this weekend. And we've put requests in for the next 2 weeks that we can cancel at any time for additional firefighting capacity for ground resources, looking at potentially a request for 100 firefighters. But again, that's weather dependent and resource dependent. And as I said earlier, we have enough resources right now. So we weigh those requests each day to decide whether we need to pull it or add to it.
And our last question for today comes from David Ball of the CBC. David, please go ahead.
Oh, hi. A question for Minister Ma, please. It's about long-term preparation for wildfires. You mentioned about cutoff or isolated communities by disasters in general. As we see more of these kind of climate-related or other natural disasters kind of compounding, what's the plan for making all communities less likely to be isolated? Is there a kind of criteria for making sure there's not a single road, for instance, into many places? Or because we're also seeing the Alaska Highway having these issues now. We saw it with Highway 8 and landslides several years ago. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that question, but I think it was probably a more generic question about the overall approach to preparing communities for emergencies in the future. The creation of the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness came as a demonstrative of government's recognition that the climate crisis is upon us, and with the impacts of the climate crisis, we're seeing more and more extreme weather events occur more frequently to a greater extent. So the scope, scale, frequency of these natural disasters and these extreme weather related emergencies is increasing through time. And so the transition of Emergency Management BC to Emergency Management and Climate Readiness was largely intended to acknowledge that we can't just be good at responding and recovering from disasters. We also have to be better at preparing for and mitigating the impacts of those disasters before they happen. Under the UN Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the most important first principle that we need to take on is to understand the hazard and to understand what climate change actually means on the ground for communities in wildfire prone areas, in flood risk areas, in landslide prone areas all across the province. And so over the next year and a half, my ministry, working with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, we are undertaking a disaster risk and climate risk resilience analysis. It is a long acronym. We're trying to get a acronym that is more less of a mouthful. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because someone's flashing a note at me. So under that work, we will be making an assessment of how climate will impact natural disasters throughout the province. So it's incredibly important work. It's very technical work that will hopefully inform the types of investments that the province is able to make into the future. And with that very rambly answer, I'll also pass it on to Ian Cunnings to see if he has any other additions to add. Hopefully he heard your question better than I did, Ian.
Yes, thanks, Minister. In addition to the future state planning and review that the Minister just mentioned, currently EMCR has what we call an advanced planning unit that is working with a variety of partner ministries and most importantly, the BC Wildfire Service in looking at where the fires are now on the landscape and using their predictive services branch, taking a look at, in some ways, a very scientific crystal ball about where the fire may move to, so we can work with Indigenous communities and local governments that may be isolated by wildfire to make them better prepared and in a situation in which to respond to that. In terms of being able to have more than one road in and one road out for each community in British Columbia, well, I would suggest that's certainly a lofty goal to achieve. Those that have some reference to the topography of the province, that can prove difficult, but we're confident through our advanced planning efforts that we can help our partners be in a better position to respond if required. Thank you.
Minister Ma, thank you. Sorry, I was not heard. Specifically about isolated communities from all kinds of disasters, not just fires. Isolation we've seen multiple times.
What we've seen in the case of Port Alberni is that when we work together, we are able to establish alternate routes quite quickly, and we leave no stone unturned in terms of how supplies and fuel to communities, how we help communities access the essential services that they require. It can involve establishing detour routes using Forest Service roads. It can involve taking into account waterways, whether barging is an option, boating is an option. And we also use aircraft as well. So when a community is isolated, we will work with them. We will make sure that that those essential services and supplies get there. But in terms of advanced planning, the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund does provide funding to communities to evaluate their evacuation routes and evaluate those kinds of alternative routes that may be required. To imagine that we can anticipate the kinds of impacts that are going to happen in every community across the province is it's probably not quite, it's very difficult to anticipate what will happen in this wildfire season, but that's why we have to be flexible. We have to be fast. We have to be agile when dealing with these situations.
Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes today's event.